Hey, Comics Cubers. In September, Komiket from the Philippines organized the Philippine International Comics Festival, an online festival which will be live next year, but an online festival which included interviews with writers, artists, and various people from the comics community around the world. This December, I will be uploading the 3 interviews that I did on every Monday of the month. This second interview is with a longtime friend of the Comics Cube, former Green Lantern writer Geoff Thorne. Welcome everyone to PICOF 2023. I am Duy Tano of the Comics Cube. I am with Geoff Thorne. And of course, because this is a Zoom session, everyone will have the opportunity to type in their questions into the Q&A chat box. And I will be working that into our conversation, Geoff. So everyone just type away, ask Geoff any questions about writing and keeping a calendar.
Yeah, and keeping a calendar. Good Lord.
So people may not know this, but of a lot of the people that I've interviewed for the Comics Cube, Geoff, you and I are friends. Cheers.
Yes, that's my man.
And I'm very happy to have you here. Before we start,
you're great. You're great. I have such a good time talking to you. It's awesome.
Before we start, Geoff, I'm going to ask you, does the writer's strike prevent you from answering any questions about live action, or is that fair game?
I don't think I think I'm fine because I don't have anything to promote that's new. And if we're talking about old work,
that's fair game.
So I think I'm good.
So process stuff, that's okay?
All good.
Right. The title of this webinar is writing for corporate, writing for yourself, because you have done all of these things. You have written for licensed properties in all sorts of media, including comics, including animated series, including live action, and you also do your own stuff. You have a Patreon, for example.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you first, what is ultimately for you more fulfilling?
Wow. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to say writing my own stuff. There are a great many pleasures that you get out of writing for corporate titles, especially if you're a fan of the title. Like, I'm a Star Trek fan. I get to write Star Trek novels. I'm obviously a huge superhero fan, so I get to write some of the superheroes in Marvel and DC. But end of the day, they own those things, and a lot of the things you want to do with them, you can't. Like, you're just not allowed to try things. So you can't get mad about it, but on a certain level, there's no such thing as 100% when you're working in that way, because so much of it is out of your control. Like, so much is not in your control. And it's not a bad thing, it's just the way it is. So if I could make the exact same living just doing my own things, that's what I would do.
Would you say there's a difference in the process too? Because obviously when you're writing for yourself, it's just you. And when you're writing for licensed comics, you've got a team of collaborators. And I assume when you're writing for an animated series, it's an even bigger team. And I don't know if that's bigger for live action or...
It's definitely bigger in some ways. Animation and live action are slightly different. So let's talk about comics first. Mm-hmm. Writing for, let's say, Marvel or DC, because that's what everybody knows, but it could be any company that owns Transformers or G.I. Joe or something like that. The company has an idea of what it wants for that property. It could be Batman, it could be Ultraman, it could be anything, right? But they have an idea. Usually they will have planned out maybe as long as a year or two how they want to develop that character. But they haven't told any of the writers that. So we're out here in the cold, and what we do is, I really like, let's just use Spider-Man. I really like Spider-Man, and I've got this cool idea for how to resurrect the Green Goblin and how to rejigger their relationship and have some real fun doing that. So I go in and I pitch that, if I'm lucky enough to get an editor to pay attention to me. I go in and I pitch that. And if it fits with what they already wanted to do, then they'll go, oh, that's great. You're a genius. Come, we will, yes. And then they hire you. And then you work to fit your idea into their structure, right? So you don't realize that's what you're doing, but all of their notes have to do with sort of whittling down. Let's say your idea is a giant block of blank marble. Their editor's job working for the company is to whittle that down so it looks like the statue of David from their point of view. So all of the things that are not what they want to do start to get whittled away until that core thing is left. And if you're lucky, that core thing still holds most of your idea, like what you pitched. If you're unlucky, it does not bear any, it's not recognizable by the end, but you still have to write it. So
because you're under contract.
Yeah. And you know, it's not like that's a shock, right? Like that's what the job is. That's why it's a job. You know, we're not playing, they're paying you money. So you know that going in, and you just hope you can retain as much as your original thing as you brought in with you. The other thing that doesn't happen when you're working for yourself is if you're on an ongoing book, an ongoing comic book, the things that were true in January may not be true in July. And you don't know. So the editors may come to you and go, you know that thing where Spider-Man and MJ were going to get back together? Could that be Felicia Hardy now? It's like, no, we spent 6 months building it up to this other thing. Well, we need it to be Felicia, so it's going to be Felicia. Like, it is going to be Felicia. Would you care to write it that way going forward? Depending on how much time they give you, that can be a shock to the system, or it can be a really derailing moment. And there's nothing that you can do to anticipate it. And it's not anybody's fault, right? These are gigantic, some of them multi-million-dollar properties that are connected to video games and movies and, you know, all this other stuff. And there's just no way for a writer to know what's going to change 6 months down the line from the corporate side. So that's a huge difference from making your own stuff. And you have to be able to roll with it, basically.
What about, can you give an example, for example, from, you know, probably your most well-known run, which is on Green Lantern, John Stewart.
Okay.
Of something just
Sure.
not being what you planned it out to be.
Well, we plan to have 3 years. So that's one thing that changed very rapidly. But
you got one double-sized one, though. So all of Geoff's all of your issues were double-sized.
I'm not mad at it, but Green Lantern is a perfect example overall. The story of the Green Lantern, I told you this on your channel, but what I pitched to DC Comics was maybe a mini series or a maxi series focusing on just the one John Stewart character. And it was discrete. It was going to be off away from everything else that was going on. And that's what it was sort of pitched out as and designed to be. And then a whole lot of things happened that had nothing to do with the comic book, but at the company side. And they came to me and said, will you take over Green Lantern? Like, what? You know, like, oh, okay. You know, and that caused a massive amount of restructuring, bringing in things that were not in the original idea. Multiple characters I had never planned to use were suddenly now on deck. They really wanted to use the Joe Mullane character, which I was not averse to, except I know the writer is amazing. Her creator is an amazing writer. So I was a little nervous about being the first one to, you know, other than her to write it. But basically, I would say from my original idea, 35 to 45% of what ended up in the book came from the company, in the sense that they're like, these things must happen. And they were none of the things that I had come in with, but it is what it is, right? Like you're working at you serve at the pleasure of the president, basically. So yeah, there were a lot of changes. And there were other things like I wanted to use Neil Gaiman's endless character, Destiny, in the book. And when I first pitched it, Dan DiDio was the editor, and he didn't have a problem with that. He was like, sure, go crazy, do what you want to do. But then he was gone, and the new editors are like, oh, you can't use anything related to anything in the Endless, while I'm writing the series that's already been approved. And I'm like, excuse me? But like issue 5 or 6 is all about this thing. It's like, yeah, you can't have it. So like, oh, wow, okay. So the version that the audience got has zero to do with what the original plan was, like literally zero. So this is the kind of thing, and you kind of have to roll with it. Like I say, there's so many things you just cannot know. And I guess some writers will get upset and, you know, walk off a project or something maybe. But really the best course is just to go, okay, that sucks today, but tomorrow morning I have to sit down and figure out how to make it work. So
the job.
That's good. Yeah.
It's a job. And issue 5 or 6, I think that's the one where Joe talks to Sinestro.
I don't know if it was that one. There were 2 things they wouldn't let me do that I thought I was going to get to do. One was I wanted the Daemonites from Wildcats, because it was this cosmic thing, and I wanted to include all the cosmic characters. So I just wanted to do something with the Daemonites, and they're like, nah, you can't use the Daemonites. And then, as I say, all the way into the book, I think it was more the time travel one where they go back in time and see the Guardians meet the new gods for the first time.
Yeah.
That issue. That was not in the original plan. That was not in the original pitch. That was because I couldn't use Destiny of the Endless. And so it wasn't a last minute thing. They give you enough warning. It's not like, you know, you're about to put the book out and like, you change this. No, it's more like, okay, here are the new rules. So you're writing issue 3, and on issue 5, this is going to happen. We're not doing that anymore. You're going to have to figure something else out. So you have months. You have a couple of months.
You pivoted on that wonderfully. So for those not in the know, Geoff's Green Lantern run focused on John Stewart, the longtime Green Lantern from 1967, being leveled up because John has long been treated as, you know, a side character, and you put him front and center. Similarly, his co-star in that book is Joe Mullane, who was introduced maybe a couple of years before your run, written by only one writer, novelist N.K. Jemisin. So here's my question, Geoff. What is the unique challenge of taking a character who has been written by so many writers and drawn by so many artists, but never fully defined, versus one character who's completely fully defined specifically because she's only been written by one person?
Well, it's a massive difference. It's a massive difference. And I was nervous, like, not for nothing, but Nora Jemison's a much better writer than me. So I was like, oh boy, here we go. But the trick was Far Sector, which was where that character was created and used by her creator, was told from the point of view of that character. You were inside her head throughout the story. I was not doing that story that way. So really all you get to see of the character is what anyone in the room would see of that character. You're at no time inside her head with her. So all I had to do was make sure she sounded right and behaved properly, as she would if she was talking to other people. Like the internal monologue, I didn't have to worry about that because there wasn't one. Like, so that was helpful. In terms of John, the whole reason I wanted to do the book was because so many people had their hands on John, and they had just sort of left a muddy, that's John Stewart. He's a Marine, and he does Marine-y things, and he was an architect for 5 minutes, and let's do that. And who's his girl? Well, his wife's dead, and he blew up a planet, and, you know, and that was after 30-odd years, and I was like, you know, this guy needs a break. The question is, was there a time when the company found my writing lukewarm? Never. If anything, they were like, you need to tone that back, sir. You need to come right back from the line. So There are many things I wanted to do that they were like, no, 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 no. There were many gory scenes that would have happened differently. Tom Rainey and I especially, there were a couple of sequences that Tom drew as written, and the editors were like, are you too crazy? We're not putting this out. We're not doing this. Like, it was just too bloody, I guess. I wanted
Geoff,
a much...
I was talking to Jeremy Adams, who's writing Green Lantern now, right?
Okay.
Because we were talking about his Flash run. So I was talking to Jeremy, and he basically said that you did like such a cosmic thing that he had to pull back.
Yeah, it was so huge. But they said that was why I was hired, to do cosmic things. So no, there was never that sense. I don't have an adversarial relationship with my editors, but as a real writer, as a creative writer, like none of us are on, we're not on staff. So my job in the world is just writer. So I write Geoff Thorne stories, and sometimes a company like Marvel or DC will go, oh, we want to use that Geoff Thorne story. But it's still a story that I would make up, and I tell it in the style that I would tell it. So the editor's, part of the editor's job is to say, yes, sir, that's a good idea basically, but this book is PG-13. Or, you know, seriously, like I'm, you know, and the only way you can know is if you just write it. So, so there's a lot of oversight that does not exist when you're doing your own thing, which is both good and bad. Editors are, when they're good, they're great. You know, there's things that a writer might want to do that, you know, you'd look back on, it's like, why did they let me do that? Why didn't anyone stop me? You know, and then there's other things where like they may suggest something, you know. Oh, here's something I don't think we talked about. The reunion of
There's something we haven't talked about?
I know. The reunion of Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz that you saw in the book is not the one that I wrote. I rewrote that reunion like 4 times because the editors did not want me to do it the way I first did it, which was I don't know who's in the audience has read this series, but these 2 characters have been separated for quite a while, both thinking the other was dead. And then when they meet again, they're both massively changed from the last time they saw each other, but they're really good friends, like possibly lovers. Like that was the implication, that they might one day become lovers. So when I wrote for them to see each other in the middle of this huge battle, this huge conflagration of events, they notice, they see that it's the other one. I'm like, oh my God, Simon, oh my God, Jessica. And they have this little moment of happiness in the midst of all of this crazy. And then they get back to work. And the editors are like, no, don't do that. And I was like, oh, why? And they didn't really have an reason. I never got a clear reason, but they were like, nope, rewrite it, do something else. So I did something else 3 times until they agreed on the 3rd thing.
So they told you you can't do something, but they didn't tell you in which direction to take it.
All they said was, we don't want them to.
How are you supposed to know where to go?
They just said they don't recognize each other in this moment. We don't want them to recognize each other in this moment. And I was like, all right, I'll figure something out. And what I figured out, tried 3 times, and they approved the one you saw. So that's it. What determines a writer's run on a series? Like, do you get a contract that states you get to work on a book for X number of months? Or is it performance-based? Like if the series tanks, is that when the publisher decides to change writers?
Yeah, that question is from Bambi Amago, who is a local comic book writer.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a little of both. The contract is you're on this book for a period of time or a period of issues, right? So in my case, for Green Lantern, we'll just use Green Lantern because it seems like that's the most known. I was on the book for, initially I was on the book for I think 8 issues. And then around issue 2, they said, we want to extend that to 10. And then they said, we want to extend it to 12. So that's how that happened. But when I pitched it, it was with the understanding that this was part 1 of a 3-part thing that was going to have an extended legs. But the people that agreed to that either left or got fired from the company. So when the contract's up, the contract's up. If the book had tanked sales-wise, which it did not, by the way, at some point, the numbers come back and the company knows well before the public knows, right? So like on the book that I did for Marvel Mosaic, which I was really proud of and was completely out of my own head, and they were just letting me make up something and it was great. Around issue 5, they were like, Geoff, you're going to have to wrap it up. And it was meant to be an ongoing series. And they're like, I think you're going to get to 8. And I was like, okay. So I had a little bit of time to sort of slide into the ending so it wasn't a wreck at the end, right? Like it seemed like we could wrap it up. And that was due entirely to sales. Like everybody loved the book. Everybody was happy to stay on the book. Everybody backstage liked the book, but the public did not. They were simply not buying it enough. So they're like, we see the writing on the wall. This is over. Wrap it up. And that's kind of how it works. Like you're there to sell comics, essentially. If you don't, or if they change editorial direction. Like,
yeah,
very well known that I'm not a Hal Jordan fan. I'm just not. And everybody knows I was not going to write a Hal Jordan book, no matter what, right? Wasn't a big deal from the company side. They're like, cool, we go right, John, have a ball. But at some point, the company decided we wanted Hal back in the middle again, right? So at that point, they have a problem in the sense of, if I really want to stay on and fight, no, it's a Jon Stewart book. They don't have to deal with me, but that would have been unpleasant for everybody when there's no reason for it to be, right? My contract is up, so they just don't bring me back, and they bring in Jeremy, who wants to write Hal Jordan. Simple, right? And they let
not really, but okay.
They let Philip Johnson write John.
Yeah.
They want to take John in a different direction based on what's going on with Hal, basically.
Yeah.
So, but this is what happens with corporate properties. You can't get upset about it because things are constantly changing on a side of the business that you're never going to see. It's like a big curtain, and occasionally a guy pokes his head out and goes, we're going to do this now, you know, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, let's go left, you know.
As you know, there is a misconception that your Green Lantern book did not sell well, but the truth is your Green Lantern book sold only slightly less well than the previous Green Lantern book, which was by Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp. Grant Morrison and Liam Sharp are, to put it bluntly, bigger names than you or Marco Santucci and Tom Rainey.
Fantastically bigger. Like Grant Morrison name on a book sells the book. Like,
and the fact that your book didn't sell significantly less than that, I think, is a testament to
we
how well
sold
your book
an average
actually
of between, I think, 3,000 and 5,000 less than them. And
yeah, that's not anything.
That's nothing. It was not the numbers. It was an editorial change. And, you know, in DC's defense, they were getting bought and rebought and sold and resold. People were being fired. People were quitting. You know, it was a mess backstage. I do not envy the editors and the executive staff at all going through that process, because the writers don't see any of that. All we get is sort of these edicts from on high. We're now doing this, you know, and so.
And that's one of the things, that's one of the differences between writing for corporate and writing for yourself, right? Because
very much so. Like, and you have to be able to be a team player. Like, we do not own these characters. We just don't. So as much like, if I get to write the Black Panther, or if I got to write the Prowler, I love the Prowler. I've loved the Prowler since I was like 9 years old. But once you start writing it, I don't own the Prowler. And if they decide the Prowler is now going to be a, you know, I don't know, a dance hall musical star, and he's not going to be a thief anymore, and Geoff, you're on the book and we've got a contract and you're going to be writing it for another 8 issues, so you're going to have to make that change now, I can walk off the book, or I can figure something out, right?
All right, yeah.
For
those uninitiated, when Geoff says the Prowler, he means the original Prowler, Hobie Brown.
Hobie Brown. All right, next question is, do you feel yeah, I can read it out loud. Do you feel there's a big difference between writing for the Star Trek anthologies and novels and writing for comics? And did you learn anything that you feel carries through to your current writing? That is from Ray Doble. Okay, Ray. The short answer is yes, I learned quite a bit writing for the Star Trek stuff that does carry over. But the interesting thing is, the editor at that time of the Star Trek books, of which I was concerned with, had decided to use a TV writer's room model for how they were going to do the Star Trek books while I was one of the many writers there. So everything was tightly coordinated. It was very much a continuity. You could look at the books like seasons, things that happened over here in book X influenced things in book Y, and everything was coordinated. Everybody knew what everybody else was doing, and it was a great way to learn how to write in a team in that way. Not in the sense that we were writing each other's books, but in the sense that everybody knew what everybody was doing, and the editor would be like, okay, you can't use character X, or conversely, character X must die by this period in the story, and it happens to be your book, right? Your story is taking place during this event, therefore this character cannot survive past your book because these other things are already happening. It was fascinating writing for, and also I love Star Trek. I'm a gigantic Star Trek head. So again, that goes back into getting to write characters that you've loved your whole life. There was a character I had to kill in my book that I did everything I could to keep alive and still honor the idea that he got killed, to the point where I was like, you never saw a body, you never saw a body. Right? And they're like, whatever, Geoff, he's dead. And I was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, so I definitely learned a lot from that, and it all crossed over both into writing TV and into writing for big two properties. It's somebody else's toys. It's just the easiest way to think about it is these are somebody else's toys, and they're being gracious enough to pay you to write them. And if you pitch them an idea that they hadn't thought of, or that they think, oh, wow, yeah, that'll goose the character in some way, or that plot line will fix this other crappy thing that we were embarrassed by, or whatever the hell it is, that's lucky on both sides. But at the end of the day, you can't get upset if they change their minds, because you don't own it.
It's not yours. You have to have a level of detachment. Writing for shared universes must seem so weird sometimes, because sometimes I'm thinking, I was reading Mark Waid's Flash, right? And then there's a storyline which crosses over with like the other DC universe titles at the same time.
Right.
And then what ends up happening is like, oh, there are these monsters. Why are there monsters? It's explained in some other title. In any other medium, Geoff, this would be considered bad writing.
It is bad writing, but it's really, okay, I have to be very careful. It isn't bad writing because the writers have no control over these sorts of things. It is a lack of coordination amongst the editorial staff. And for the last, I would say, minimum 5 years, that coordination was not possible. Like, it just wasn't. They would try their best. I cannot tell you, literally, I'm legally not allowed to tell you how much sympathy I have for what was going on backstage at DC Comics while all these books, not just my book, the entire, what do you call it, future state thing, which people still don't understand what that was, all the different books that came out of that, the Infinite Frontier initiative, of which my book was under, but all of the other books were also under the Infinite Frontier aegis. I was doing all this crazy stuff with the New Gods. Meanwhile, over here on War World, PKJ is doing a whole bunch of stuff with the New Gods that had nothing to do with my New Gods. And over here in the Infinite Frontier book, Jeremy's doing things, I think it was Jeremy, was doing things that involve the New Gods that had nothing to do with my book at all. And there was literally no communication between these books. So, and I firmly believe, having worked with the people that I work with, that had there been the right number of editors and the right structure that was in place, that communication would have occurred, because it started that way, right? At the beginning of the run, it started that way, and it just got crazy.
Geoff, I'm friends with an actor who once told me that you can't really tell if someone's a good or bad actor because there might be an edit that is good, right?
That's true.
Is that true also for, I see his point. Do you think there is, to some degree, is that true for something like comics? Like, can you consider somebody a bad writer, or is that just a matter of not having the right team around?
Okay, there's a sliding scale. First of all, good and bad are a matter of opinion for the audience. So you and I might read the same comic and I might love it and you might hate it. Both of us are right. right? I'm not going to convince you, oh no, Geoff's way is better. I secretly love, this Harley Quinn as a hooker comic book that Geoff is in love with. No, you don't. You're both right. Everyone is equally right. So, is someone a poor comic book writer? It depends on it depends on your criteria, what makes a good comic book writer. Is a good comic book writer one who sells a lot of comic books? From the company's point of view, yes. But I'm here to tell you, and everyone in the audience knows, that there are many a best-selling comic book that you will never buy, because to hell with that guy or that lady. I'm not buying anything they write or draw or whatever. So are you wrong? Nope. I feel like there's a lot that goes wrong with comics or movies or TV and books that have to do with editorial imposition. Like, something was going to go a particular way. A lot of the time, I will say this, a lot of the time when the audience feels like, wait, what the hell? Why did that happen? Where the comic book was clearly building to something and then suddenly it wasn't that. That's almost always because editorial changed their mind about something and said, go write it. And that's happened to me a couple of times where I was like, wait, what? And they were like, yeah, you got to do it this way. I was like, but I built the story to do this. Like, we know. Tough.
We have a question from Chester Cuizon, which is,
okay.
At one point, have you ever managed to convince the editors to keep the whole or at least a part of your idea that they were asking you to change? And how difficult was it?
So far, I guess I have to say no. It's a little less cut and dried than that. Like, for instance, in the Green Lantern comic, the company said, because of what they were doing with the larger DC universe, the power battery must blow up, right? There must be a period of time where all the Green Lanterns are powerless and that the battery's been destroyed, which, by the way, my response was the same as the fan response. Didn't you guys just do that? And they're like, yeah, but we're doing it again and you happen to be on the book, so we're doing it. And I'm like, okay, so
they blow up the universe every 2 years, Geoff. It doesn't.
Dude, I know. Like every other year is a universe-shaking cataclysm. It's not a crisis if it happens every 5 minutes, guys. It's not a crisis, right? It's like again. So, so the battery blowing up was a big thing for them at the beginning, but how I did it was up to me. So there's things where you can tell you can't talk them out of it, they wanted Joe in the book, and I was like, I don't know if I'm the guy to write Joe. You have to ask the original author, is it okay if I take over? And they're like, we don't have to. And I'm like, you do if you want her in the book I'm writing, because I'm not going to write it if she doesn't want to do it. And they
is that a writer's code? Like you got to get that kind of thing going.
No, that's just me. That's just me. They're like, I would feel the same way. That's why I specifically chose Destiny of the Endless, even though they didn't let me use him, because Neil Gaiman did not create Destiny. He's the only member of the Endless that he did not create. So I was like, well, this is fair game. It fits with my story. And they're like, no. But in the context of putting that character in, it was just part of something DC really wanted. Joe was in a lot of books at that time. But for me, ethically, I was like, look, a particular author created this character out of whole cloth, right? And you would not have this character to do anything with had she not done this job that she did. And I respect her as a novelist because she's just a fantastic novelist, like independently of any of this. And I'm not going to screw up her character just because you say so. If she is like, oh, no, I have other plans for her, I'm going to come back and do another book and all of that stuff, then I'm out. I'm not going to put her in the book. And they're like, well, we want her in the book. And I'm like, well, go ask her if it's cool, because I will be very uncomfortable. And I will, at the very least, I will minimize her presence in this book to the point where why would you bother? So it wasn't an argument like that, but I was very firm about that particular point. But then on other points, there was no fighting, like the Gaiman thing. I was like, really? And I even said, he did not create Destiny. That's the one character he did not create. So it should be fair game, especially since he only, by the way, his presence in the story was only as the background character sort of walking around he had one line in the original story, which is, and now it's time for you to go. Right? It's like, why are you doing this to me? But no, once something's rock solid, you can't talk them out of it. Like
I tend to
once they've
think of
decided.
purple robe destiny and brown/gray robe destiny as two different destinies. You
Right.
know,
Right. Well, now that he's been gamonized, there's only one. So, you know.
I got a question before we move on to self-publishing, which is that
Okay.
obviously you work with different artists, Tom Rainey, Marco Santucci, in Green Lantern. You got work with a bunch of different artists. What is the secret to working with different artists and, getting the best out of them?
Well, one, respect that they know what the hell they're doing. That's one thing. I'm an illustrator myself, nowhere near their caliber, but I know what the job is. So two things that will make an illustrator happy, I think, is clearly written scripts that they can understand what the hell you mean. Well, my scripts are tight. I don't do that Marvel method thing where it's like, and this stuff happens on this page, and this stuff happens on this page, and then send me the pages, and then I'll put dialogue in. I don't do that. I write a screenplay, basically. But
you think if your artist was Jack Kirby, you would script this tightly?
Here's the problem. At the end of the run, like if I work with Marco again, I really want to. If I work with Tom again, and I really want to, my scripts will not be as tight because I now know them and I can trust them that they're not going to, like, I don't know, you could have an underground roller derby thing going on and the illustrator thinks what will be really exciting is if a dragon bursts through. I'm like, but there's no dragon in the script. I know, but it's so boring. They're just roller skating. Did you read the dialogue? No, I have to draw it. I'm like, okay, take the freaking dragon out. The dragon should not be there, right? And then you can get into tense situations because they might think they know better visually. It's boring right now, basically. And you can't get into that space with any illustrator because then it's just contentious, right? So I try to write as tightly, as loosely as I can at the beginning when I don't know the artist. But as you go forward, you get to know what they can do, and more importantly, what they like to do. So you don't change your story, but you can change some of the way the story is told based on the fun you can tell the artist is now having with what they're doing. I asked Tom at the beginning, like, what are you sick of drawing? That kind of thing. And I was like, okay, well, we're not going to be doing any of that. We're going to be way over here. And he's like, no, let's go. Little weird things. But yeah, I call it places of power. They are the director and the cinematographer of your movie. They're also all of the actors. Like, that's what the illustrator's job is, and the inker and the colorist too. They're the special effects. Those three people and the letterer those four are the color, they are the entire technical staff and the performance staff of your movie. So you want to write a movie that they can understand and also enjoy to make, right? You don't want to have, I don't want to ever I would never hire an artist who only drew lots of boobs. Like, you could tell that the only reason that they want to draw comics is they can draw women with very little clothing on and gigantic breasts. I'm not saying that there's not a place for that, but not in anything I'm writing. So if that's you as an artist, best for us not to be on a project together, because you're going to inject that and I'm going to take it out and we're going to fight. Why even have that fight? Just figure it out, whose talents are best to fit together. But at the beginning, I don't trust the artist because I don't know them. So the scripts that I write are incredibly tight, detailed. This is the shot. This is the angle. This is who's in the background sometimes. Because I'm an illustrator, I'm like, this is what the character looks like in my head. Now go draw it better, things like that. But so far, I've only worked with people who are basically ace professionals. There's never been any fighting or battling about stuff. Every once in a while, sometimes with Marco, because English is a second language, possibly his third or fourth language. I don't know how these Europeans go, but sometimes I'll write something that's a sort of American shorthand, and he'd be like, "What does this mean?" You know.
Yeah, Marco is
Some-
amazing, but whenever I have to interview him, I have to give him the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, because it's just not his first language. And we might say something that doesn't translate, basically. And Maria Laura, by the way, and Chris Cross are also on that book, and they all killed. All of them killed. The working with artists, there's this weird dichotomy in the fan base, which is who's more important to the book.
Yeah, that was
From
going to be
the-
my next question.
that's a nonsense question. If I want to write a book that isn't a comic book, I'll go write a novel. That's what I'll do. But if the illustrator wants to write a book that isn't a comic book, then they'd go put out an art book. Plenty of illustrators do that, and they make a lot of money doing it. If you want to write a comic, if you want to make a comic book, it's words and pictures together. So in reality, both are equally important, right? And the story in
Stepping back is a skill for the writer, right? You have to know when to be able to step back and let the artist shine.
Both do. Like, again, if a person has, like, I was lucky enough to work with some really, really talented artists, and Marco especially, only that I did not know his work going in. There were things that I asked him to draw that I was like, oh my God, I hope this guy can, I hope he can do this. But more than did he do it, he went crazy. Like the background characters, I didn't tell him to draw all that. I would have been perfectly happy with an empty walkway with like 2 aliens on it. You know, crowds can be drawn in a lot of ways. You don't have to show me everybody's face, Marco. Everybody's face does not have to be distinct in the background. But that's how he rolled. And as soon as I knew that he was not only comfortable with it, but happy to do it that way, I was like, oh, you like to draw lots of people doing stuff. All right, sir. Let's see how far we can go, right? And we had a ball. Like I said, I would love to work with both of those guys again, and hopefully I will. Like, I can't afford them myself right now, but you'll see us all work together at some point.
I'll tell you something, Geoff. This is because some issues of Green Lantern were delayed, right? And lately, yeah. And I always assumed the reason for it being late was Marco, because Marco's style is so detailed. But no, sometimes he would post something that he was drawing on the side, and he was like, I'm drawing this while waiting for the next Green Lantern script.
Yes, and that's true. What would happen is, now remember, this isn't true of most comic book writers. Most comic book writers just write comics. But occasionally, while I was writing Green Lantern, I'll be on a TV show doing work on that. And the two things would bump up against each other. So what would happen would be, the plot was known to everyone for every issue, but the editor would be like, look, I know you're up on it, but Marco is coming to the end of drawing the last book. We don't want him sitting around. So I would write the first third of the book and say, okay, get going. And then he'd start, and then I'd get back to work on my TV show. And then the editor would be like, Geoff, Marco is going to be done with page whatever. Do you have those pages? And I'm like, yeah, here they are right now. They're all sitting here, right? So there was a little bit of both. Like, I wouldn't describe Marco as slow. I would describe him as detailed. I wouldn't describe any of the artists as particularly slow, but all of them work the way they work. And you see Marco's output. That stuff's phenomenal. Like, Tom was a little faster, I will say, but neither of those guys could have carried that double-sized book by themselves. That was a lot of work.
And they didn't. You had a couple of fill-ins.
Yeah. And that cosmic stuff is crazy, man. Like, they're being asked to make up things and draw things, and that do not exist, and they have to fit sort of what the writer has in their head. And it was a mess, man. Like, in that sense, that's a lot of work that's heavy on the illustrator, that the writer can just write 2 sentences. And then an army of Kuns come over the hill and do blah, 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 and the artist is like, well, how big an army? Like, when you say army, what exactly do you mean? Oh, there's dragons and Tyrannosaurus Rexes in the background, and there's some space cadre in the air above them, and in the front there's these foot soldiers, and their armor is different because the other guys in the back are the leaders, so they have different kind of armor. They're like, Geoff, just stop talking. I'm going to come to your house and kill you. You don't do that. You have to write it in a broad enough way that they get it, but that they can flex and write within their own sensibility, right? You don't want to hit them with the script. The script is a collaboration.
Yeah, I had Gene Ha on here yesterday. He was our first guest at this festival, and he was telling us a story about how when doing top 10, Alan Moore got sick and he didn't have a script for Gene, so he just wrote one page that was like an overhead shot of the city, and it was
Draw
like,
that.
here, just draw this for the next 5 days.
This'll keep you occupied.
This will keep you occupied.
Yeah, man.
Let's move on to the next question. Okay, go on.
Okay, go.
I feel like this is a question that I should ask next, even though it's not in order, because we're talking about artists. Again, from Bambi Amago, if you could choose from artists deceased and living, who would you want to collaborate with? And I'm going to ask you for 2 answers because I know you're going to say Jack Kirby.
That's true. Yes. Kirby for sure. In fact, especially with Green Lantern, nothing against the artists that I work with, obviously, but you should just picture it as Jack Kirby drew that whole book, because that was Jack Kirby was my co-pilot on all of that. But living or dead, Jason Pearson.
Really?
The late Jason Pearson was one of the best comic book artists that I believe has ever lived. And he had a lot of issues, certainly.
Tragic.
Tragic mental health problems. But I always hoped, I hoped that I would one day get to script something for him to draw, or to make up a whole thing together that we would both own. And it just never happened. So those would be the 2.
Yeah, I know that before you worked with him, your answer probably would have been Chris Cross, right?
Oh yeah, Chris was my man. I mean, there's bunches. Mike Grell, Walt Simonson, Sarah Pichelli, right? Oh dear God, Elsa Cartier. Elsa Cartier.
Yeah, I would butcher her name.
Yeah, and of the dead, Darwin freaking Cook, in a heartbeat. Yeah. There's a lot of living artists that I still have on my list that I'm not going to make it to get to. I just had to bite the bullet. I'm never going to work with Chris Bachalo. That's never happening, I'm sure.
Oh, that would be awesome, though.
Alan Davis, no chance. That's not happening.
That's a little bit farther off reach. I think he's semi-retired at this point.
Definitely. I don't know what would draw him back, but it definitely ain't going to be me. I wanted to work with John Byrne, but I'm
going to say that's not happening, Jeff.
Yeah, that's not happening. But as problematic as everyone says John Byrne is, let him be that. I would be happy to write a book for John to draw. Like, he's great.
Yeah. A couple of anonymous attendees who may be the same anonymous attendee, giving you the opportunity to sell yourself here. Have you ever tried self-publishing where you have more freedom to write your comic into however you want? If so, is it financially sustainable? If so, well, how and where do you publish it?
Okay. Full disclosure. I have, because of my real profession, or my main profession, I guess, a bigger nest egg than most people who do self-publishing. I can devote the necessary thousands of dollars that it costs to get a good artist and get everything done, and it doesn't hurt me financially to any degree, right? It's not a lot of money, but it's enough money that if you're just living a regular middle-class life and you have kids and they're going to college and things like that, I don't have any of that. So I have more disposable cash. So the short answer is I just do what the hell I want. However, sometimes the money runs out. So like when you're in between jobs, you're not balling like that.
Or when you're in the middle of a strike.
Or exactly that. How funny. So these poor illustrators that I've contracted to hire have to wait till I can afford to pay them, because I'm not going to make them do work before I can pay them. I think people should be paid for their labor. I'm weird like that. But so yes,
justly for their labor too.
Yes, appropriately. Like I always ask my illustrators, what is your rate? And they tell me what they wish to be paid. If I can't afford it, I say, damn it, I can't afford that. I'm so sorry. You'll never know how sorry I am. I can't afford that. Maybe next year. right? When I hopefully have more money to spend on this.
Geoff,
Um,
I wrote a script recently and I found an artist for it and she gave me her rate and I was like, I think you need to charge me more.
well, I'll never go that far because I'm trying to get these books out. But yeah, so yes. So the short answer is yes, I do self-publish. I'm slowly branching out into it's a real company. It's not just me publishing my own stuff. So I've already hired a bunch of illustrators, but I'm going to start hiring writers to do certain stories once I've established the IP, and once it's my work that establishes the IP, then I can hire other people to write the further adventures of whatever. So it's gratifying, but you're not going to make any money at it. So don't try. Don't go in with that in mind. I've been in and around independent comics for 20 years now, and I've watched 98% of the people who've tried it break their fortunes trying to do it. For various reasons, the market has changed. They're trying to compete with DC and Marvel, which you should never try to do. You can't, so you shouldn't try to do that. You should just figure out what it is that you do and do that really well. With that in mind, we all know of the success stories. Own, Primer, even Walking Dead is a perfect example. A black and white comic book about zombies became the biggest comic book success in history, maybe. At the beginning, no one would have known, and everyone, I think, what did Kirkman say? I had to lie to the editors and tell them that the secret of the zombies was aliens.
These are going to be aliens. And then
right,
20 issues later, they were like,
me.
where are the aliens?
Like, well, you don't care now. It's a huge success. Shut up. Right. But that was a lie. There were no aliens. He did not want to do that, but it was the only way to get the book made. The point is, it's hard. The market is brutal. The audience base is just not what it was when we were all starting out. I do it because I love comics. I don't do it because I'm making money. So the short answer is, if you're trying to break even, you should consider yourself incredibly lucky if you break even. You should assume loss.
There's a couple of things about to that particular answer. I think that everyone who makes it big from self-publishing, or like makes it big doing just their art, whether we're talking Bill Watterson with Calvin and Hobbes, Todd McFarlane with Spawn, or any of those guys, they like to say, like, I followed my dream and you should too. But I think we should put that in the context of there's a lot of people who do, and they don't break even.
Listen, here's the thing about that, and people got to remember, I'm 50 plus years old now. So I was around prior to Image and when Image got started. Image was not the thing it is now, right? What happened with Image, if you're saying just follow your dreams, basically Image was a labor dispute between the big star artists and, I guess at the time, Marvel, right? They wanted more pay-wise. They wanted some sort of what we have in our screenwriters union. They wanted medical insurance. They wanted some sort of job security, and they wanted pay raises and equity in the property that even at that time was making the company way more money than what these guys were getting paid. And Marvel basically told them to screw themselves. And they're like, oh, really? Okay, we're just going to start our own company and take our fans with us. And because no one had ever done that, Marvel was like, are you high? You'll be back here in 2 minutes. And that's not what happened. But if they tell you to follow your dreams and everything will work out because that's what happened for me, their baseline was, I'm a giant star in the medium in which, right? It's like Beyonce leaving Destiny's Child. Oh, yes. Poor Beyonce. She left her band. Like, what will happen, right? You kids do like Beyonce. Don't do like Beyonce. Don't, because that's not your life. That's not it's not my life. It's nobody's real life. That was a time and a place, and it was lightning in a bottle, and it is really crappy advice to just throw out there. If you want to do it, but understand you're probably going to get hit financially. You're probably not going to blow up. You're probably not going to get a Netflix deal or make $1 million on your thing or whatever the hell it is that's in your head. That can't be the reason you're doing the comic book. If you're doing it because you think you're going to get a lottery win at the end of it, you are in for a world of hurt. A world of
You got to
hurt.
do it because you love it.
You have to do it because you love it, and everything else is gravy. And if you're not doing it, comic books specifically, if you're not in it for that reason, you're just going to hit your heart punched over and over and over and over. Right? It's a hard thing to tell people, but I'll tell you this point blank: the comics I make for myself don't sell anywhere near even the worst selling comic. The comic I did that sold the worst, I think, was probably Solo was almost certainly the worst selling comic, but I loved it, and we had a ball making it, and I loved that comic. But that comic sold astronomically better than my best selling indie comic, and it wasn't good enough for Marvel to keep it going. So that's what really happens. Okay, so if you can't afford it, if you can't afford to take the hit, think about it like this: your comic book you're making is a car you just bought. Can you afford for that car to be destroyed today? Can you drive out today, have your car get totaled, no injuries, just the car is totaled? What would happen to your life after that? If nothing, by all means, go crazy, you know. But if that's a big hit, you better go in smart, because it's going to hurt you. It's definitely, it's not going to break you. It's going to hurt you.
So it seems that the solution to something like that would be to have a nest egg, to work on multiple projects and, you know, have a day job. So an anonymous attendee asks, any time management tips for someone who works on many projects at once like you?
Very simply, if you're not getting paid, then they're the priority of complexity, right? Do a little bit of work on the most complex one first, get it out, get whatever you've allotted that I need to get done, get that little bit done, and then move on to the easier things, right? Because what will hang you up is the most complex one. You think, oh, I'll get the easy ones out of my way, and then I'll just work on the complex one. That's not how it will play out. The easy ones will also have problems, and then you're stuck with a deadline of some kind, right? And you'll not do your best work. So start most complex to least complex, and allot periods of time. If you're juggling, like in the morning, I'm doing this and this only. I'm not thinking about any of the other stuff. Have my lunch, and then after lunch, I'm doing these other things, whatever they may be. When you're
Complexity
working,
is, of course, probably compounded by whenever the deadline for each project is.
right. So this, what I just said, is if it's just all your own stuff. If you're working for on a contract basis, and you've taken on multiple jobs, one, tell the person who's in the number 2 position, right? So I've made a deal with Duy. I'm going to do a comic with him. He's paying me. I've got a contract. I've begun work. And then, I don't know, Todd McFarlane wants to do something with me. Oh my God, it's Todd McFarlane. He's going to pay me even more. But he came in second. So I have to tell him, well, I'm already under contract to this other person who's paying me less, but they got they're first in line. So can we delay that? The thing you want to do, right? Because I can't delay this other contract that I've already signed and I'm underway on, even though you're the big dog, right? And so that's one, that's 2. You let the new person know what's already going on. That helps you manage your time, because if they're reasonable, they'll figure a way out. And 3, don't take on too much work. That's a really good rule. Don't take on more just because it would be really fun. Take on the work you know you can handle. You should never do work that you don't think you can knock out of the park, if it's a baseball metaphor. If you can't hit a home run with it because there's not enough time, do not take that job, because the work will be there forever with your name on it. Right? So
That's right.
Only take the work, the amount of work where you can do your best on each thing. And each illustrator, each writer is different in that regard. Like I can do a bunch of stuff, but also those things they're quite different from one another. So like I wouldn't be writing, like I know people are writing 4 different comic book titles at the same time. I have no idea how they do that, right? But I could write a comic book and a novel and be on a TV show at the same time, because they're massively different ways of writing that don't really overlap. Like the time management's
Different parts of your brain.
Yeah, and also there's like, for instance, with a comic book, while I was working, when I finally figured it out, be on the show, and that was all week, and it basically took all your brain space. You couldn't do anything else. But literally on Saturday morning, up, boop, comic book, all the way through to Monday morning. And it was enough. You know, bearing in mind, I've been writing professionally for over 20 years now. So again, when people are telling you to do stuff, always remember how old they are and how long they've been doing the thing, right? Because an expert telling you, oh yes, just go get a socket wrench. Dude, you're a professional plumber. You have your own plumbing company. I don't even know what a socket wrench looks like. Will you please explain to me how to actually do it? You know, so like that. So yeah, I would say just don't take on every project just because it's exciting. Like start with one, figure out how long it takes you to do it effectively, and then you go, oh, maybe I could do two at once. You know, some illustrators are amazingly fast, and I don't know how they do it. And some we say they're slow, but as Duy points out, George Perez drew every brick in a wall. Literally, like, can you imagine the heart attack his inkers had? George Perez drew every crack in an old piece of marble in the background that no one's looking at. He drew everything in that shot, okay? But he was still able to meet his deadlines. He just, you know, if you figure out I can do a page a day and it looks awesome, then that's your speed. You can make it go faster, but it's better to be good than it is to be fast.
Jaco Miguel Magpayo asks, since self-publishing is financially unsustainable for some people, is it ideal to submit your comic proposal through creator-owned publishers such as Image and Dark Horse?
Yes, I would say a simple yes to that is go through that process, bearing in mind, and I'm going through this myself right now, something got stalled of my own because I have been shy about crowdfunding and things like that, mainly because I'm fantastically lazy. But a lot of the companies, the smaller publishers, have figured out that the real money is in when Hollywood comes and knocks on their door about a property. So they try to take a chunk of your copyright off the top. And so it doesn't matter how big or small the company is. The only ones I know of that don't do that right now are Dark Horse and Image. Dark Horse pays a rate to everyone involved with the comic book for they have a deal. It's an interesting deal, and I think it's worthwhile. They also have their own production company, so you can sort of piggyback into Hollywood via that, if that's part of your goal. It can be, whatever. But they will pay your staff, essentially. It's not a high rate, but it's a rate. Image doesn't pay anybody. So you're basically still self-publishing. You're just getting the Image eye and their distribution and things like that, and it's great, but you're not really in a better boat than you would be if you were just doing it on your own, except for the distribution and the actual printing stuff.
Do they not help with the promotion?
I don't know. You tell me how much does Image promote its books? I think it depends on who you are. Like, you know what I mean? Like, will they promote? Yeah. Right? They will promote a person who's easy to promote more effectively than somebody who's just random.
You know, to your point earlier, Geoff, I do think Image Comics, you know, they like to point out that they are the home of independent publishers. This is where you go to follow your dreams and stuff. But the most successful Image comics, the ones that Image tends to promote and push, are the comics by the people who have already established themselves.
How shocking. It's hard. It's hard. If it wasn't, everyone would do it. It's hard.
An anonymous attendee asks, how does your daily life play out as a jack of all trades?
Ah! Fantastically. I love it. I've been a jack of all trades. That's my whole life has been like that. I was an actor for 5 minutes, and it was one thing, and it was driving me nuts, so I quit that, and now I do all this other crap. I like it. It's not for everybody, but bearing in mind, I don't have kids. My wife and I, it's a double career. There was a period of about 4 years where it was really awful that no one ever gets, I never discussed that because what can you learn from it except it's awful. But yeah, I like it. I like not having one thing to do all the time. My brain won't sit still long enough to do it like that. I have to have more things occupy me. I like it. It is challenging because time management is not my best skill, in the sense that I do better when I'm under contract than I do when I'm not. my rate of creation is higher when I know that there's a deadline that will cost me money, rather than, do I have to draw page 30? Nothing really happens on page 30. I can save that for later. Like, it's just them sitting in a room. That's work. No one's paying me. I know I have to do it, but no one's waiting on this comic book right now. So, and so that's both a luxury and an obstacle, right? If you're all mentally lazy, then it's an obstacle. And I'm a little bit mentally lazy. So, but it's fun. I love it. I love it. And I'm always trying to look for new things, like doing audio dramas and stage plays, and just any kind of writing that allows me to flex a little bit and learn something. I'm always trying to learn something. And the best way to learn, from my point of view, is by doing. It's easier to learn as you go and make the mistakes yourself, from my point of view, than to have someone sit in a lecture hall and tell you, do it like this. Like, well, that's how it worked for you, but it might not work for everybody. That's a good one way to try it. But what about this way? I never heard of that. That's crazy. It's like, well, my brother did it that way and he's doing fine. Your brother's a blasphemer. Like, I like to have my hands on things, which means I need a lot of things to have my hands on.
You mentioned that you were an actor for a while, and that I want to ask if that ties into this next question by Yume, which is, how do you keep the unique voices of your characters?
Well, here's a trick. I don't do it. You won't see it every time, but basically I figure out something that the character always says, some phrase that the character will say when they're excited, or a quirk of speech that they have. Like, it's easiest to figure out when you're writing aliens, like literally alien beings, because you have to write them I feel like you have to write them in such a way that it's clear that they're aliens without seeing the picture, right? So they're going to use different idioms than we would. Things like their genders would be different, so they might not have a word for he or she. Things like that. If someone's like, every one of us speaks whatever their primary language is, and every one of us is around people relatively constantly who are from another country or even from another region who don't speak your language the way you speak it. They may have learned it, but they don't speak it like a native. So they're going to make weird errors that everyone who natively speaks the language is like, that was adorable. That's not how you say that, right? But when you're writing, that's how you can tell that character is speaking sometimes, right? I haven't done this yet, but I hope I get a chance to, where there's a room full of people who all speak one language, and the third person, the new person does not, has just learned it. So they essentially speak a broken version of that language, surrounded by people who speak it properly, even with slang or whatever. And as the story progresses, their ability to speak the language gets better as you move forward. So that if you started, let's say it was a comic book, in issue 1, they speak it very poorly. By issue 12, you forgot that they never spoke the language properly, right? So that's how I do it. And
that's what immersion does to you.
Yeah, I listen to people a lot too. Like, it's really rude, but when I'm in restaurants and things like that, I listen to people's conversations all the time. I'm constantly eavesdropping, and that was cool how they said that. I'll steal that. Or if I go to a different city in the US, it's very easy because there's a lot of different regionalisms. If you pick them up, you don't say them because you're going to say them wrong, but if you hear them, you can write them properly, right? Like, I can't imitate a New Orleans accent, but I can write a New Orleans accent, right? And that's just from listening and taking little notes.
Feels like, first of all, that is great advice for all of you writers out there. Just eavesdrop. For those of you who aren't writers,
always eavesdrop. Everything is for your stories.
For those of you who aren't writers out there, do not do it. It's weird.
It is weird. Well, just get really good at it. Just get really good at not getting caught eavesdropping.
We're down to what I think is our last question, which is from Chester Cuizon, who I think you can talk about this more, Geoff, because he's asking if you have ever attempted to pitch a Bible or want to work as a showrunner for a TV show, either live or animation, which of course you have.
I have and do.
Feel free to expound on that.
Yes. All of these professions involve a writer coming up with something in a vacuum, putting together the best package they can, and then going to some company with a big money and say, hey, let's publish this or let's sell this together. So I've sold things to Hollywood that you'll never see because they got bought and they got developed. And then at the end of development, they're like, yeah, we don't feel like making this. So everybody got some money out of it, but the audience never sees it. Show Bibles are an interesting, weird thing for writers right now in our profession, because part of the strike is about people being forced to do free work, right? So when you're pitching a TV series and someone says, well, we want a show Bible, and that show Bible must include, this is something that's happened to me many times, that show Bible must include all character breakdowns, every episode of the first, a synopsis of every episode of the first season, sometimes even into the second season, so we know you know where you're going, all this kind of stuff. And it sounds great from a non-creative corporate point of view. You're basically describing a project, right? This is the car we want to make, this is the ad campaign we want to run, but that's not really how stories are made in the writer's room. So all of that work is done. It takes a lot of time, and they make you do it. But at the end of the day, when you get in the writer's room, most of that stuff's getting thrown out, because you're going to have 10 other people in the room, and some of them are going to have way better ideas. And you're going to be like, oh, we're doing that. The hell with episode 6. We're doing that episode 6. So the other thing is, it's a hard thing for a lot of writers to have to do. Like, I am very lucky because I have multiple skill sets. So when I make a pitched Bible, I can do all the art, and it can look pretty good. And if I can't make it look perfectly good, there are many a trick that I know from working with Photoshop for 20 years that can get it where I need it to be. That's not a writer's skill set. They shouldn't be expected to have to know how to do photography or to paint or, to structure a book. That's not what a screenwriter does. Just like a novelist should not be expected to automatically know how to write a screenplay. They're completely different disciplines. So the long answer is what I'm saying. The short answer is, it's not right, but currently companies make you do it, so it's a skill you need to acquire. It sucks. It just sucks.
But that's the way of things. I feel like we're talking about some.
But in animation, that's live action. In animation, you basically must have a show Bible of some kind, because the company you're pitching needs to know what the characters look like. At the very least, you need some art, maybe 2 or 3 pieces of art. Say, here's what the main characters look like. Here's what the vibe of your show is, right? You don't have to go crazy like me. I go crazy, but I can draw very well. So it's not really a chore for me. If you can't, what you may have to do is commission some art for your animated piece. And you work with an illustrator who does literally 3 pieces for you, or 4 pieces. Overall, like the movie poster, character break, a set of the characters doing something, standing together just as characters, not doing anything. And here's who they are, and here's what they mean. You do all the writing part. And then some third thing, some adventurous scene or humorous scene from the book to show you, from the show to show you kind of the tone of what the show will be. And then the rest of it is you in a room telling it how great it was going to be, and your words on the page. That's real, and that's natural, and that makes sense in animation, because they need to know what it looks like. But in live action, which they're also forcing people to do, it makes 0 sense, like literally 0 sense. So,
Geoff, I feel like this has been a very insightful discussion, because I feel like when we're talking to writers and asking for tips, there's a lot of talk about structuring a plot or finding voices and whatnot. Geoff, this was great. Always great talking to you. Thank you so much.
You're my man. I am so sorry. I almost missed this because I'm stupid and thought it was tomorrow. I'm an idiot.
It gives us something to laugh about.
You hit me. Oh my God. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone who's in the chat. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. You guys made my job so much easier by asking 14 questions.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Everyone.